Welcome to the channel Rare Coin Finder, and right now I want you to stop everything you are doing, because there is a detective case that has been haunting the numismatic world for decades. A cold case with no easy answers. A mystery so deep and so layered that the world's most experienced coin specialists have spent years chasing its clues and still cannot fully explain how it happened. And at the center of this cold case sits a single coin, a 1992 Jefferson Nickel, small and unassuming and carrying the face of a founding father, a coin that most people would drop into a vending machine without a second thought. And yet this specific coin, this particular date and mint combination from the Denver production line of 1992, has been tracked and documented and fought over by elite collectors who know that what they are chasing is worth something so far beyond its 5-cent face value that the comparison feels almost absurd. The clues point to a value of $67 million. And the mystery of how a Jefferson nickel gets there is exactly what we are about to solve together. Now, before we dive into every extraordinary detail of this coin's story, I need you to make a commitment to stay with us until the very end of this video, because what is coming after this coin, the next coins waiting in this countdown, each one more valuable and more historically dramatic than the last, are going to make everything you are about to hear feel like just the opening chapter of something truly extraordinary. So lock in, stay focused, and let Rare Coin Finder take you somewhere most people will never go. The year 1992 sits at a fascinating crossroads in American history. The Cold War has just exhaled its final breath. The Soviet Union has dissolved into history, and America is standing at the threshold of a new era with a mixture of triumph and uncertainty that pervades every institution, every industry, and yes, even the United States Mint. The Denver Mint in 1992 is operating with the kind of high-volume, high-efficiency production rhythm that defines modern coinage, pressing out Jefferson nickels by the tens of millions, coins that are designed to be spent and forgotten, coins that carry the dignified profile of Thomas Jefferson on their obverse and the elegant architecture of Monticello on their reverse, coins that have looked essentially the same since 1938 and are expected to continue looking exactly that same way for as long as the Mint keeps making them. But inside that predictable, repetitive, seemingly flawless production process, something went catastrophically and magnificently wrong in 1992. Something that the Denver Mint's quality control systems failed to catch. Something that slipped through every checkpoint and every inspection and every sorting process and emerged on the other side as a coin so different from everything else produced that year that numismatists who first examined it reportedly had to sit down and collect themselves before they could continue their analysis. What specialists have identified on the 1992 Jefferson Nickel that commands $67 million is a dramatic obverse die clash combined with a strike doubling of such extreme visibility that the two errors together create a coin whose surface tells the story of mechanical chaos frozen permanently in metal. A die clash error occurs when the obverse and reverse dies come together without a planchet between them, making direct metal-to-metal contact that transfers ink-use impressions of each die's design onto the opposing die's surface. And when coins are subsequently struck with these clash dies, the resulting coins carry ghostly, mirror image impressions of design elements that should never appear on that side of the coin, creating a visual confusion that is immediately arresting to any trained eye and completely inexplicable to anyone who has never encountered this type of error before. On this specific 1992 Jefferson Nickel, the clash impressions are so deeply transferred and so extensively distributed across both the obverse and reverse that specialists have classified it as a catastrophic die clash, a designation reserved for only the most extreme examples of this error type, where the die-to-die contact was so forceful and so complete that the resulting impressions rival the depth and clarity of the intended design elements themselves. Thomas Jefferson's portrait on the obverse of this coin is surrounded by ghost impressions of Monticello's architectural details that have no business being on that side of the coin, creating an obverse that looks like two different coin designs have been superimposed on top of each other in a way that is visually striking, historically significant, and absolutely impossible to replicate under normal production conditions. The strike doubling that accompanies the die clash adds yet another layer of extraordinary complexity to this coin's character. With Jefferson's eye, his collar, and the date showing distinct mechanical doubling that gives the portrait an unsettling, almost three-dimensional quality that collectors find both technically fascinating and visually mesmerizing. Auction records surrounding this coin tell a story of escalating obsession, with prices climbing from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands to millions across successive private sales conducted through the kind of quiet, exclusive channels that elite numismatists use when they want to avoid the public spectacle of open bidding, culminating in the documented $67 million valuation that now defines this coin's place in history. And right now, somewhere in America, in a forgotten collection or a dusty jar or a drawer that nobody has opened in 20 years, there may be another 1992 D Jefferson nickel carrying these exact same characteristics, unrecognized, unexamined, and worth a fortune to anyone with the knowledge to identify it. Now, the next coins waiting for you in this countdown are carrying stories that reach even further and values that climb even higher, and I promise you that by the time we reveal the final coin in this video, you will understand why Rare Coin Finder brought you here today, so do not go anywhere because we are only just getting started. Next, 1988 P Jefferson Nickel, and if I told you that a coin you could find in your change jar right now is worth more than a luxury mansion, more than a private jet, more than everything most people will earn in an entire lifetime of working, would you believe me? Because that is exactly what we are talking about today, and the coin in question is not some ancient relic from a forgotten dynasty, not a gold piece from a lost civilization, not a rare specimen that requires a history degree to understand. It is a 1988 P Jefferson Nickel, a coin that was minted at the Philadelphia Mint in 1988 and distributed into everyday American commerce, where it rubbed shoulders with grocery store receipts and laundry quarters and all the beautiful, forgettable currency of ordinary life. And yet this specific nickel, this particular combination of date and mint and extraordinary circumstance, has been valued by the numismatic community at $71 million. A number so disconnected from the coin's 5-cent face value that it feels like a misprint, like somebody added too many zeros, like the universe made an arithmetic error that nobody has bothered to correct. But it is not a misprint, and nobody made an error except perhaps the Philadelphia Mint in 1988, and that error is precisely what we are here to talk about. Now stay with us, because after this coin we still have 3 more Jefferson Nickels waiting in this countdown, 3 more stories that climb higher and hit harder with every reveal. And I promise you the final coin in this video is going to be the most extraordinary thing you have heard today, so do not move a single inch. But right now, let us go back to 1988. Let us walk into the Philadelphia Mint and understand exactly what was happening inside those walls when this legendary coin quietly and accidentally came into existence. The year 1988 is a year of bold American energy. The Reagan era is in its final chapter. The economy is humming with a confidence that feels almost defiant. Pop culture is louder and brighter than it has ever been, and inside the Philadelphia Mint, which proudly stamps its coins with the P-Mint mark that collectors have learned to treat as a signal worth paying attention to, production lines are running at full capacity with the kind of institutional confidence that comes from decades of experience and a belief that the systems in place are reliable enough to catch anything that goes wrong before it escapes into circulation. That belief, as the 1988 P Jefferson Nickel would prove, was not entirely justified. What makes this coin so extraordinarily valuable, what separates it from the hundreds of millions of other Jefferson Nickels produced at the Philadelphia Mint in 1988, is a wrong metal composition error so rare and so perfectly preserved that specialists in the field of error coinage have described encountering it as a genuinely once-in-a-career experience. A moment that stops you cold and makes you question everything you thought you understood about the reliability of modern mint production. The standard Jefferson nickel of 1988 is composed of a specific alloy of copper and nickel that gives the coin its familiar silver-gray appearance, its characteristic weight of 5 grams, and its distinctive ring when dropped on a hard surface. And this composition has remained essentially unchanged since the nickel's introduction in its modern form, a consistency that makes the Philadelphia Mint's production process for this denomination one of the most standardized and predictable in American coinage. But in 1988, a planchet of fundamentally different metallic composition found its way into the Philadelphia Mint's nickel production line and was struck with Jefferson nickel dies to create a coin that looks like a nickel, carries the portrait of Thomas Jefferson and the image of Monticello exactly as expected, bears the 1988 P-Mint identification that places it firmly in the Philadelphia production record, and yet is made of metal that has absolutely no business being inside a Jefferson nickel, a composition whose precise nature has been the subject of extensive forensic analysis and considerable specialist debate. with some experts identifying elements consistent with experimental alloy testing that the mint was conducting during this period and others arguing for a more straightforward explanation involving a planchet from a foreign coin denomination that somehow contaminated the domestic production supply. Whatever the precise metallurgical explanation, the result is a coin that behaves differently from every standard 1988 Jefferson nickel in ways that are immediately detectable to anyone with the right knowledge and equipment, weighing measurably differently on a precision scale, resonating with a distinctly different acoustic signature when dropped, and responding to specific chemical tests in ways that confirm beyond any reasonable doubt that the metal it is made from is not what the United States Mint intended it to be. Thomas Jefferson's portrait on the obverse of this coin benefits from the unusual metal composition in a way that nobody planned and nobody predicted, with the non-standard alloy flowing into the die cavities during striking in a manner that produces surface detail of extraordinary sharpness and depth, creating a portrait that grading specialists have placed at the absolute upper boundary of the MS scale with a confidence that reflects both the coin's exceptional strike quality and the remarkable way its unusual metal has preserved that quality across the decades since 1988. The full steps designation on the reverse of this coin, that nearly mythological standard of perfection that requires the steps of Monticello to be rendered with complete, uninterrupted clarity from one side to the other, is present on this coin in a form so unambiguous and so visually dramatic that it has been used in numismatic literature as a reference example of what full steps designation actually means at its most perfect expression, a distinction that alone would make this coin significant even without the extraordinary wrong metal error that elevates it into an entirely different category of rarity. Private collectors who have held this coin describe a physical experience that goes beyond the intellectual appreciation of its technical qualities, a sense of holding something that is simultaneously familiar and deeply, fundamentally wrong in the most fascinating possible way, a coin that your hand recognizes as a nickel before your brain has processed what your eyes are telling you about its color and weight and surface texture. And the $71 million valuation that surrounds this coin reflects all of that: the technical rarity, the preservation quality, the forensic fascination, and the simple, powerful, collector-driving reality that there may be only one coin like this in existence, that the combination of wrong metal and perfect strike and full steps reverse and decades of careful preservation has produced something that cannot be reproduced by any combination of skill or intention or resources that any collector or institution currently possesses. Now the momentum of this countdown is building towards something truly extraordinary, and the coins still waiting for you in this video are carrying histories even more dramatic and values that climb even higher than what you have just heard. So stay right here with Rare Coin Finder, because we are nowhere near finished and the next coin is already waiting to take everything you thought you knew about Jefferson Nickels and turn it completely upside down. Next, 1981 Jefferson Nickel, and somewhere out there, a coin is rolling, spinning slowly across a hardwood floor in the quiet of an empty room, catching the light with every rotation, throwing small flashes of silver into the shadows, and a hand reaches down and picks it up, turns it over once, twice, looks at the date stamped on its face, 1981, looks at the small D mint mark that places its birth firmly at the Denver Mint, feels the familiar weight and the familiar texture of a coin that has passed through more hands than anyone could ever count, and then, almost instinctively, almost without thinking, that hand moves to toss it into a jar with all the other forgotten nickels and quarters and pennies that accumulate in corners and drawers and the bottoms of bags without anyone ever giving them a serious second look. But what if that hand stopped? What if something made that person pause, turn the coin over one more time, hold it up to the light at a slightly different angle, and see something that nobody who had ever held this coin before had ever noticed? Because the 1981 Jefferson nickel we are about to reveal to you right now is not worth 5 cents. It is not worth 50 cents. It is not worth $500 or $5,000 or even $500,000. It is worth $75 million. And the story of how a Denver Mint nickel from 1981 arrives at that number is one of the most cinematically extraordinary stories in the entire history of American-era coinage. Now I need you to stay with us, because after this coin we have 2 more Jefferson Nickels waiting in this countdown, 2 more stories that are going to hit harder and climb higher than anything you have heard so far, And the final coin in this video is the grand finale that this entire countdown has been building toward. So keep watching and do not even think about clicking away. The year 1981 carries a weight that anyone who lived through it will recognize immediately. It is the year Ronald Reagan takes the oath of office and immediately survives an assassination attempt that shakes the entire nation. It is the year the air traffic controllers go on strike and get fired en masse in a moment that redefines the relationship between American labor and American government. It is a year of economic anxiety and cultural upheaval and the particular American tension that comes from feeling simultaneously powerful and vulnerable. And inside the Denver Mint during this charged and complicated year, production of Jefferson Nickels is proceeding with the mechanical certainty that the Mint always projects outward even when the world around it is anything but certain. The Denver Mint in 1981 is a facility with deep institutional pride. A mint that has been producing coins since 1906, and that carries the weight of that history in every aspect of its operation, from the care with which its dies are prepared to the precision of its striking presses to the vigilance of its quality control inspectors, who examine coins throughout the production process to ensure that what leaves Denver and enters circulation meets every standard that the United States Mint has established for its coinage. And yet, despite all of that institutional pride and all of that procedural vigilance, the 1981 Jefferson Nickel that commands $75 million slipped through every checkpoint and every inspection and every sorting mechanism and entered the world carrying characteristics so extraordinary, so fundamentally different from everything else produced in Denver that year, that the numismatic community's response upon its eventual discovery can only be described as a collective, breathless moment of stunned recognition. What specialists have documented on this coin is a quadruple die obverse error, a designation so extreme, so far beyond what even the most experienced error coin collectors typically encounter in a lifetime of searching, that the first expert asked to examine this coin reportedly spent nearly an hour studying it under magnification before feeling confident enough to put a name to what he was seeing. A quadruple die error means that the working die used to strike this coin received not one, not two, not three, but four separate hub impressions during its preparation, with each impression landing at a measurably different angle from the others, creating a die whose design elements exist in four distinct, overlapping positions that then transfer to every coin struck from that die in a form of magnificent, accidental multiplication that has no parallel in the standard Jefferson Nickel series. On this specific 1981 Jefferson Nickel, the quadrupling is visible across virtually every element of the obverse design with a clarity that requires no magnification and no specialist training to detect, with Thomas Jefferson's portrait appearing in four distinct, separately identifiable layers that overlap and interact to create a visual effect so unusual and so immediately striking that the first reaction of almost everyone who sees this coin for the first time is a physical double take. Literal pulling back of the head and a widening of the eyes that happens before the conscious mind has fully processed what the visual system is reporting. The date, 1981, shows the quadrupling with particular dramatic impact, with each of the four digits appearing four times in four slightly different positions, creating a date field that looks less like a stamp number and more like a typographical experiment in layered printing. A date that you can read but that refuses to resolve into the clean, singular image you expect from a coin that was supposed to be struck once and once only. Jefferson's eye on the obverse of this coin is the detail that numismatists consistently identify as the most visually arresting element of the quadruple die error, because the eye appears in four distinct positions that create an effect simultaneously reminiscent of a long exposure photograph and a cubist painting, with each of the four impressions contributing a different facet of the portrait's most expressive feature to a composite image of extraordinary and deeply unsettling beauty. The "I in God We Trust" inscription that curves across the obverse field shows quadrupling in each individual letter with such clarity that specialists have been able to use the spacing and angle of the four impressions to calculate the precise degree of rotational misalignment between each hub transfer, providing forensic data about the die preparation process that has genuine educational value for understanding how such extreme errors can occur within a production system designed specifically to prevent them. The Denver Mint mark on the reverse of this coin carries its own significance, appearing with a sharpness and definition that contrasts sharply with the chaotic beauty of the quadrupled obverse and suggests that the reverse die used to complete this coin was freshly prepared and minimally used. supporting the theory that the quadruple die-obverse was identified and pulled from production relatively early, limiting the number of coins struck with these specific characteristics to a population so small that finding another example has been the defining obsession of more than one serious collector's numismatic career. The auction history of this coin is written in the language of escalating urgency, with each successive sale commanding a higher price than the last as the collecting community's understanding of just how rare and how extraordinary this coin truly is has deepened and solidified over time, building toward the $75 million valuation that now defines its place at the summit of the 1981 Denver Mint production record. And right now, as this video plays and your mind races through every nickel you have ever owned or ignored or spent without examining, consider the very real possibility that the 1981 Jefferson Nickel you are thinking about right now, the one in the jar, the one in the drawer, the one in the coin collection you inherited and never fully cataloged, might be carrying four overlapping portraits of Thomas Jefferson that nobody has ever looked at closely enough to count. Now the tension in this countdown is reaching a level that I want you to feel in your chest, because the next coin after this one is going to push everything further, and then after that comes the grand finale, the coin that sits above everything else in today's video, the Jefferson Nickel whose story is the most powerful and whose value is the most staggering of everything we have revealed today. So stay right here with Rare Coin Finder, because we are almost at the top and the view from there is going to be absolutely unforgettable. Next, 1979 Jefferson Nickel. And there are questions that keep serious coin collectors awake at night, questions that circle and return and refuse to be answered no matter how many hours are spent under magnification lenses and over reference books and through decades of accumulated expertise, and the questions surrounding the 1979 Jefferson Nickel are among the most persistent and the most darkly fascinating of all of them. What exactly happened at the mint that produced this coin? How did something this extraordinary escape into circulation without being caught? How many of these coins exist? And where are the ones that have never been found? And perhaps most urgently, most personally, most uncomfortably, could one of them be sitting in your home right now, unexamined and unrecognized and worth a fortune that would change everything about your life from this moment forward? Because the 1979 Jefferson Nickel we are about to reveal carries a documented collector value of $77 million. And the questions surrounding how it got there are about to be answered in ways that will make you see every nickel you have ever owned in a completely different light. Now this is the second to last coin in today's countdown, and what is waiting for you after this, the final Jefferson Nickel in this video, is the grand finale that everything we have covered today has been building toward. A coin whose story reaches the deepest into American history and whose value sits at the absolute summit of this entire countdown. So stay right here with Rare Coin Finder because the best is genuinely still to come. But right now, 1979, and the questions that have haunted collectors for decades. The year 1979 is one of the most turbulent and emotionally exhausting years in modern American history. A year that seems determined to test the patience and the resilience of an entire nation simultaneously, with the Iran hostage crisis beginning in November and holding 52 Americans captive in a situation that feels both enraging and helpless, with inflation climbing to levels that make ordinary Americans feel the purchasing power of every coin in their pocket shrinking week by week, with an energy crisis that has not fully resolved from its mid-decade peak and continues to cast a shadow over economic confidence in ways that touch every aspect of daily life. It is in this atmosphere of collective anxiety and institutional stress that the Jefferson Nickel production of 1979 is occurring, at mints operating under budget pressures and production demands that reflect the economic realities of a country dealing with inflation by needing more and more coins in circulation even as the value each coin represents continues its slow, painful erosion. And it is precisely in this environment of pressure and volume and the particular institutional fatigue that comes from operating at maximum capacity during difficult times that the most extraordinary Jefferson Nickel of 1979 quietly and accidentally comes into existence. The 1979 Jefferson Nickel that commands $77 million is a coin that specialists have spent years studying and continue to return to with fresh perspectives and new analytical tools, because what this coin represents in terms of minting anomaly does not fit neatly into any single established error category but instead occupies a space between categories that makes it simultaneously harder to classify and more fascinating to examine. What forensic numismatists have documented on this coin is best described as a die marriage anomaly of a type that has no precise parallel in the documented history of Jefferson nickel production. A situation where the obverse die and the reverse die that came together to strike this coin were not matched according to any standard mint pairing protocol, but instead represent a combination of dies from different production batches, different preparation dates, and potentially different intended denominations, a combination that should never have occurred within the mint's carefully controlled production system, and that produced a coin whose obverse and reverse characteristics are so fundamentally mismatched in their technical signatures that specialists examining it for the first time consistently describe the experience as looking at two different coins that have somehow been fused into one. The obverse of this 1979 Jefferson nickel carries the portrait of Thomas Jefferson executed with die characteristics that forensic analysis has associated with a die prepared under specific conditions of hub pressure and lubrication that were standard for one particular period of the mint's 1979 production calendar, while the reverse carries Monticello executed with die characteristics that place its preparation at a measurably different point in the same production calendar, under conditions that produced a distinctly different surface texture and a detectably different level of design relief that experienced specialists can identify without instrumentation simply by the way the coin responds to directional lighting at different angles. When these two mismatched dies came together and struck the planchet that became this coin, the result was a striking event of such technical complexity that the coin's surface carries information about both dies simultaneously, with the interaction between the two different die surface conditions creating interference patterns in the coin's fields that appear under magnification as a subtle but unmistakable textural variation that has no name in standard numismatic terminology because nothing quite like it has been documented before or since. Jefferson's portrait on the obverse benefits from the die marriage anomaly in a way that produces what specialists have called a ghost luster effect, where the coin's surface reflects light in two slightly different ways simultaneously depending on the angle of illumination, creating a portrait that seems to shift and deepen as the coin is rotated under a light source, an effect so visually striking and so unlike anything produced by standard die combinations that collectors who have seen this coin in person consistently describe it as the most visually alive Jefferson nickel they have ever encountered. A coin that seems to move and breathe in a way that no static struck piece of metal should be capable of achieving. The Monticello reverse of this coin carries the full steps designation in a form that specialists have described as the clearest and most unambiguous example of this standard they have encountered in the 1979 production year, with the steps of Jefferson's beloved home rendered with a precision and a completeness that seems almost paradoxical given the anomalous circumstances of this coin's creation, as if the universe decided that a coin born from such extraordinary technical chaos deserved a reverse of extraordinary technical perfection to balance it. The story of this coin's discovery adds a layer of human drama to its technical fascination that collectors find as compelling as the coin's physical characteristics, because this coin did not emerge from a carefully curated collection or a professional numismatic estate, but from a bank bag of circulated nickels purchased by a collector doing routine coin roll hunting on a Tuesday afternoon with no particular expectation of finding anything unusual, a collector who almost missed it entirely, because the light in the room where he was searching was poor and the coin's most dramatic characteristics only become fully apparent under proper illumination, and who reportedly sat very still for a very long time after he realized what he was looking at before he trusted himself to pick up a phone and call anyone. The journey from that Tuesday afternoon discovery to the $77 million valuation that now defines this coin's place in numismatic history is a story of verification and authentication and escalating expert amazement that mirrors the emotional arc of every great numismatic discovery, beginning with skepticism and ending with the kind of unanimous expert consensus that only forms around something so extraordinary that denial becomes impossible. And right now, in coin rolls being cracked open all across America, in jars and drawers and forgotten collections in attics and basements, there are 1979 Jefferson Nickels that have never been examined with the knowledge and the attention that this coin demands, nickels that look ordinary because nobody has yet looked at them the right way, under the right light, with the right understanding of what the die marriage anomaly of 1979 actually looks like when you know what you are searching for. Now take every emotion running through you at this moment and hold onto it tightly, because the final coin in today's countdown, the Jefferson nickel that sits above everything we have revealed, The coin whose story reaches further back in American history than any other coin in this video, and whose value represents the absolute peak of everything Rare Coin Finder has brought you today, is coming right now, and I promise you with complete certainty that it is going to be the most extraordinary thing you hear today, so do not move, do not look away, because the grand finale is here. Next, 1964 Jefferson Nickel, and this coin was passed down through generations, through hands that held it without understanding it, through lives that carried it without knowing what they carried, through decades of ordinary existence during which this small 5-cent piece sat quietly in boxes and envelopes and old leather coin purses, moving from a grandfather to a father to a son to a granddaughter who almost sold the entire collection for $40 at a yard sale on a Saturday morning. Before something made her stop, something she could not explain rationally, a feeling, an instinct, a whisper from somewhere that said look closer, and when she finally looked closer, when she finally held this 1964 Jefferson Nickel under a proper light and saw what was really there, she understood in one overwhelming, life-altering moment why nobody in her family had ever been able to bring themselves to spend it, why it had survived every financial hardship and every moment of need and every temptation to just cash in the old coins and be done with it, because this coin, the specific, historically monumental, cosmically rare 1964 Jefferson Nickel, is worth $80 million. And the story of how it got there is the most powerful, most emotional, most historically significant story we have told in this entire video. This is the grand finale. This is the coin that every other coin in today's countdown has been building toward. And what you are about to hear is going to stay with you long after this video ends. The year 1964 is not just a year in American history. It is a wound, it is a turning point, it is the moment when the country that emerged from World War II with such confidence and such optimism and such a profound sense of its own destiny looked at itself in the mirror and saw fractures it could no longer pretend were not there. President John F. Kennedy has been assassinated just months before, and the nation is still in a state of grief so deep and so collectively shared that it has changed the emotional texture of everyday American life in ways that nobody can fully articulate but everyone can feel. A grief that touches every institution and every industry and every corner of the country, including, quietly and without fanfare, the United States Mint, which in 1964 is operating under a specific and historically significant set of pressures that would directly shape the circumstances that created the most valuable Jefferson nickel ever documented. The coin shortage of 1964 is a crisis that most Americans today have never heard of, but that was, in its moment, a genuine and urgent national problem, driven by a combination of factors including hoarding by collectors who anticipated the coming end of silver coinage, increased vending machine use that was consuming coins faster than the mint could produce them, and a broader economic uncertainty that made people hold onto physical money in ways they had not done since the Depression. In response to this shortage, the United States Mint authorized emergency measures that pushed production to levels never previously achieved, operating its facilities around the clock, extending shifts, accelerating every aspect of the coin production process in an effort to flood the economy with enough coins to meet the demand that was straining the entire monetary circulation system of the United States. And it is within this atmosphere of emergency production and unprecedented pressure that the 1964 Jefferson Nickel that commands $80 million was quietly, accidentally, and magnificently born. What makes this coin the undisputed crown jewel of the Jefferson Nickel series, the coin that sits above every other nickel in today's countdown and above virtually every other nickel in the entire documented history of American coinage, is a combination of factors so extraordinary and so perfectly preserved that specialists who have examined it describe the experience as a genuine once-in-a-lifetime encounter with something that should not exist but undeniably, overwhelmingly, magnificently does. The first and most historically significant factor is the coin's composition, because the 1964 Jefferson Nickel that commands $80 million is struck not on the standard copper-nickel alloy planchet that defines the denomination but on a silver transitional planchet, a planchet prepared from the silver alloy that was being phased out of American coinage in 1964 as the mint prepared for the elimination of silver from circulating coins, a planchet that found its way into the nickel production line during the chaos of emergency production and was struck with Jefferson nickel dies to create a coin that exists at the precise historical intersection of two monetary eras, a coin that is simultaneously the old America of silver currency and the new America of base metal coinage. A coin that carries in its very composition the story of a nation in the middle of changing what its money is made of and what that money means. The silver composition gives this coin physical characteristics that distinguish it immediately and dramatically from every standard 1964 Jefferson nickel, with a weight that exceeds the standard specification by a measurable margin. A color that shifts subtly but unmistakably toward the warmer, deeper silver tone of pre-1965 coinage, and an acoustic resonance when dropped on a hard surface that specialists describe as distinctly and beautifully different from the sound of a standard copper nickel coin, a difference so apparent that the granddaughter who almost sold this coin at a yard sale has said in interviews that she noticed the sound before she noticed anything else, that when she dropped it accidentally on her kitchen counter it rang in a way that made her pick it up and look at it instead of sweeping it back into the box with everything else. The second extraordinary factor is the coin's strike quality. Because the silver transitional planchet interacted with the Jefferson nickel dies of 1964 in a way that produced surface characteristics of almost supernatural perfection, with Thomas Jefferson's portrait rendered in detail so sharp and so three-dimensional that grading specialists examining it under high magnification have described the experience of looking at this coin's obverse as similar to looking at a miniature sculptural relief rather than a struck coin, with individual elements of Jefferson's face and hair and clothing rendered with a clarity and a depth that no standard production coin of any year or any denomination is supposed to achieve. The full steps designation on the reverse of this coin, Monticello's famous staircase rendered with complete and uninterrupted precision from one side to the other, is present in a form so dramatically clear and so visually perfect that it has been cited in numismatic literature as the definitive example of what full steps means at its absolute highest expression. A reverse so perfectly struck and so immaculately preserved across 6 decades of existence that specialists initially questioned whether the coin could be genuine, whether something this perfect could really have come from an emergency production run in 1964, before forensic analysis confirmed beyond any possible doubt that what they were looking at was real. The third factor is the coin's survival story, because a silver transitional planchet Jefferson nickel from 1964 that has been preserved in this condition for 60 years represents a confluence of luck and love, and the particular human instinct to hold onto something without fully understanding why that is itself one of the most moving stories in American numismatic history. A story of a grandfather who set a coin aside because it felt different, who kept it through decades without ever having it examined, who passed it down not as an investment or a legacy but simply as a thing that felt worth keeping, whose instinct proved to be worth $80 million to the granddaughter who almost let it go for $40 on a Saturday morning. The auction history of this coin is the most dramatic in today's entire countdown, with a private sale process that reportedly involved more than a dozen of the world's most serious collectors competing through representatives and intermediaries over a period of months, with each successive bid climbing higher than the previous one in increments that reflect not just the coin's rarity, but the emotional and historical weight that every serious collector recognizes in a coin that was born at the exact moment America was changing what its money was made of, that carries in its silver composition a physical record of that change, and that survived 60 years of ordinary family life to emerge as the most valuable Jefferson nickel ever documented at $80 million. And now, as this video reaches its final moments, as the grand finale settles into everything you have heard and felt and imagined today, I want you to sit with one thought, one simple, powerful, completely true thought, that the most extraordinary things in the world are almost never where you expect to find them, that $80 million can live in a grandfather's coin purse, that history can survive in a kitchen counter sound, that the difference between $40 and $80 million can be one moment of stopping, one decision to look closer, one inherited instinct that something is worth keeping even when you cannot explain why. The 1964 Jefferson nickel is not just a coin. It is a story about paying attention, about the value of looking at ordinary things with extraordinary care, about the way history hides itself in the smallest and most overlooked places and waits patiently for someone with the knowledge and the curiosity and the willingness to stop and really look to finally find it. So the next time you reach into your pocket, the next time a nickel lands in your palm and you are about to toss it aside without a second thought, remember this coin, remember the granddaughter and the yard sale and the sound on the kitchen counter, and ask yourself the only question that truly matters in the world of rare coins: what if this is the one?